The Wehrmacht war machine would stun the world with its aggressive Blitzkrieg and widespread war crimes. But there was a litany of military generals orchestrating them all. Generals responsible for the darkest aspects of Nazi Germany's wartime atrocities, from the extermination of millions to the breach of established rules of war, from the systematic horrors of the Holocaust to the aggressive invasions. We invite you to come along for an in-depth examination of some of the Nazi hierarchy's most odious and guilty generals. Hitler's top lieutenants ranged from Nazi ideologues dripping with anti-Semitic fervor to military mainstays convinced of their own honor. Yet without fail, atrocity took place on their watch, and many would turn a blind eye. From signing decrees to leading entire armies, the Nazi generals impacted the lives of millions to the extent they would be forever labeled war criminals. Get ready to look at the culpability of some of the worst in history. Heinz Guderian is considered by many to have ensured the German victories in France, Poland, and the Soviet Union across the opening stretches of World War II. Born on June 17, 1888, Guderian was a staff officer in World War I before taking up something of a fascination with armored warfare. Across the 1930s, his blossoming fascination with mechanized warfare led him to develop the future of the German armored divisions. His 3rd Motor Transport Battalion would become the model for the entire German armored force. Come 1935, he had attracted the attention of Hitler and was demonstrating what was soon to be known as the Panzer Force to the Führer himself. His 1937 publication, Achtung, Panzer, would outline this new vision of armored war. If armored divisions had significant air and infantry support and the freedom to work independently on the battlefield, the enemy lines could be penetrated and vast enemy forces could be encircled. Nazi Germany had just been handed the keys to dominating the continent. In 1938, Guderian was made commander of the Panzer Force and led the annexation of Austria. Guderian's panzer divisions, for all their success, were foundational to many of the atrocities of the Nazi forces rampaging the continent. They would succeed in encircling many enemy troops, who therefore captured and suffered the treatment and fate of prisoners of war under the Nazi regime. The motorized infantry divisions that would follow the Panzer were often the Einsatzgruppen, SS paramilitary death squads. Just how much atrocity the Einsatzgruppen were responsible for is nearly innumerable, but perhaps best symbolized by their own war crimes trial under the Nuremberg trials. They killed at least 2 million people outside of the Holocaust, which they were instrumental in actioning. Would the Einsatzgruppen have been so widespread and dangerous in their action without the Panzer Division's fast, incisive action? Guderian would surrender to the United States in May 1945 and would face 3 years of internment. Somehow released without charge, Guderian would write memoirs titled Panzer Leader, a strange read and disturbingly a bestseller. He spread the myth the Wehrmacht was clean, denying all atrocities they and himself were accountable for. Erich von Manstein was the field marshal of the Nazi military forces during World War II and is considered one of the most talented military minds. Manstein would develop the plan for the German invasion of France through the Ardennes, which Hitler would select and result in their swift victory upon invading in 1940. Operation Sickle Cut, the invasion of France into a rapid drive toward the English Channel, rather than the expected route of the Netherlands, was such a success, Manstein would lead the Wehrmacht in the east. As field commander of the Nazi movements on the Eastern Front, Manstein would oversee the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Battle of Sevastopol, and both the Siege of Leningrad and the Battle of Stalingrad. It's here that Manstein helmed the very limits of Nazi power. Come 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad proved a bridge too far for the Nazi desire for conquest. The deep cold, atrocious battle and lack of air support left 300,000 soldiers facing death or casualty. Within 2 years, the fortunes of the war had turned. Manstein was demoted by Hitler, and as thanks for his service, the Gestapo had his house placed under surveillance. Manstein held a hideous record of witnessing atrocity. Most specifically, he would later comment on finding out the activities of the Einsatzgruppen after the fact. This is somewhat dubious, for the field marshal of the Wehrmacht to claim ignorance of the SS death squads didn't exactly fly when under trial at Nuremberg. All across the Nazi campaigns, from Flanders to Crimea, the Einsatzgruppen were routinely killing thousands of civilians and specifically targeting the Jewish population. Manstein would take an improbable high road of claiming none of the soldiers under his command murdered Jewish citizens. despite numerous accounts of vile anti-Semitism under his orders and a total lack of preventing any atrocity on the Jewish population. In 1949, Manstein was convicted on 9 of 17 charges at his Nuremberg trial and sentenced to 18 years. Incredibly, he would only serve 4 before his release. Walter Model was the man to replace Manstein as field marshal late in the Nazi war effort. Something of a dogfighter, Model was renowned for a ferocious appetite for battle and an unblinking loyalty to the Nazis. Despite winning plaudits within the party and from Hitler himself, his field commander position only got him the hardest of work. Hitler would send Model to try and revive failing efforts on the Eastern Front as commander of the Army Group North Ukraine, Army Group Center, and Army Group North. His success as commander of the 9th Army brought him close to the Führer, but the failure of the Battle of the Bulge would break their relationship down entirely. Model's war would end ignominiously. His Army Group B would be surrounded by U.S. forces at the Ruhrpocket in April 1945. Rather than surrender, Model took his own life. The Reich declared him and the disbanded unit traitors. One of the reasons Model took his own life was for many of his chickens coming home to roost. Not only was the Nazi mission lost in April 1945, but the Soviets had indicted him for the deaths of over 500,000 people in Latvia's concentration camps. Yes, as Operation Barbarossa became the Nazi goal, capturing huge swaths of the East, including Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic republics. When the Nazis took power, so came the concentration camps and the slave labor. Model would also be indicted by the Soviets for deporting over 170,000 Latvians for slave labor. Known as foul-mouthed and abusive by his subordinates, Model would be nicknamed Frontschwein. That's frontline pig to you and me. Across his command at the Eastern Front, Model showed no objection to the abuse and murder of civilians by the SS soldiers under his command. Like many of his Nazi compatriots, Model held a scorched earth policy, meaning any place the Nazis retreated from was left in a pile of ashes. Gerd von Rundstedt was another of Hitler's lieutenants, who, without the Wehrmacht, would likely never have gained across the continent of Europe like they did without him. Eisenhower would declare Gerd von Rundstedt the most able of German generals in World War II. The field marshal would take commanding posts on both the Western and Eastern Front, playing a major role in the Nazi success in France in the war's opening and the Allied assaults towards the war's end. Curiously, von Rundstedt's age plays a major part in this story. He was actually in retirement as a field commander come 1938, but returned to active combat in the Polish campaign that would start World War II. The aging field marshal would oversee the Wehrmacht's success in France, but also was seen as responsible for enabling the British successful retreat from Dunkirk. He helmed the German southern wing on the Eastern Front in June 1941, which would take the majority of Ukraine before the arrival of winter. Yet when the Soviet counteroffensive forced a German retreat, von Rundstedt was once again placed in retirement. Remarkably, retirement age would be the savior of von Rundstedt. Just 2 months after his third retirement, he would be captured by U.S. forces in May 1945. However, he was released due to ill health and his 70 years, despite being charged with war crimes. Serving and leading Wehrmacht army groups across various theaters, including Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, von Rundstedt is another case of overseeing Nazi atrocity, yet doing nothing to stop it. His units across Europe were responsible for numerous shootings of hostages and civilians. Von Rundstedt is said to have been silent and agreeable when orders for the Einsatzgruppen to descend upon Ukraine and Poland were carried out. His units were also implicated in the maltreatment of Allied POWs, especially after the Battle of the Bulge. Wilhelm Keitel took the reins as Chief of the German Armed Forces High Command, OKW. His rise through the Nazi ranks began in 1935, when he was appointed to the Armed Forces Office at the Reich Ministry of War. This would be replaced by the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, and as a notorious sycophant for Hitler, the rising Keitel was the perfect choice. Keitel would predominantly act in an administrative role, but a profoundly affecting one. While regarded as little more than a nodding donkey to Hitler by many of his peers, Keitel would sit on the war cabinet and be a key planner in many of Hitler's strategic decisions. Yet, as a chief of the Armed Forces High Command, Keitel would sign many orders and decrees that would amount to war crimes. Wilhelm Keitel was the man putting pen to paper, placing Nazi atrocity as governmental action. The Commissar order he signed off on led to the execution of Soviet political commissars captured by the German army. Keitel was well aware of the atrocities of the SS and the dismantling of human rights from the invasion of Poland, but turned a blind eye. The infamous Night and Fog Decree would be signed by Keitel in 1941. leading foreign nationals across Europe being transferred to Germany, often straight to concentration camps. In 1942, the Commando Order was signed by Keitel, allowing the murder of enemy special operations personnel even when captured, armless, and in uniform. Found guilty on every account at his Nuremberg trial, Keitel was denounced as a major war criminal and sentenced to death by hanging in 1946. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.